Do you know that moment when someone asks, "Why don't you care about your birthday?" They are smiling when they ask it, but underneath the question is confusion. Because to them, birthdays carry emotional gravity. They represent attention, validation, and proof that someone's existence matters enough to be acknowledged. But your brain does not interpret it that way. When the date arrives, nothing internally resets. There is no sudden emotional elevation, no psychological shift. You are aware of the day, but you do not feel defined by it. And this creates a quiet disconnect between you and everyone else. Psychology has identified that people fall into two distinct identity regulation systems. One system depends on external markers to reinforce self-worth. The other maintains self-continuity, independent of symbolic events. If you belong to the second system, your brain does not rely on rituals to confirm who you are. Your identity is already stabilized internally, which means the absence of emotional reaction is not emptiness, it is structural. And once you understand how your internal system works, everything about your relationship with birthdays will begin to make sense. Most people believe birthdays feel special because the date itself carries emotional power. But psychology shows something different. The emotional response does not come from the date. It comes from how your brain assigns importance to external events. For many people, birthdays act as identity reinforcement moments. Attention increases, recognition increases. Their brain interprets this as confirmation of relevance, and the reward system responds accordingly. But your brain uses a different reference point. Instead of relying on symbolic events to reinforce identity, your brain maintains identity through internal continuity. Your sense of self does not depend on ritual. It depends on direction. This means the calendar advancing does not create a psychological shift internally. You are not becoming someone new. You are continuing to be someone consistent. And this changes how your reward system responds. Your brain assigns more importance to actual progress than symbolic markers, which is why the day itself does not generate the same emotional intensity. Psychologists refer to this as self-concept stability. It describes how consistently a person experiences themselves as the same individual across time. For some individuals, this continuity remains stable, regardless of external events, recognition, or symbolic milestones. Their sense of identity does not depend on periodic reinforcement. It exists as a continuous internal structure, rather than something that must be reactivated by specific moments. The person you are today feels like a direct extension of who you were yesterday, and that continuity does not require confirmation. Because of this, symbolic events do not produce a sudden psychological shift. Your brain does not interpret the date as a point of transformation. It interprets it as part of an ongoing sequence. There is no interruption in identity, and therefore no need for emotional recalibration. This creates a quiet form of psychological independence. Your nervous system does not rely on moments to define you. It relies on continuity. But identity stability does not develop in isolation. It is shaped gradually through the experiences that taught your brain where stability truly comes from. Your brain is constantly learning which experiences are reliable sources of emotional stability and which ones are temporary fluctuations. Over time, it begins to adjust its expectations accordingly. If you have lived through environments where emotional security did not come from symbolic events, your nervous system adapts. It stops assigning deep importance to temporary peaks of attention. Instead, it begins to prioritize consistency, predictability, control over your internal state. This process is called emotional adaptation, and over time, this adaptation reinforces itself. Each birthday that passes without emotional intensity teaches your nervous system that no recalibration is necessary. The day arrives and nothing destabilizes your internal state. Your brain observes this consistency and updates its expectations. It learns that continuity remains intact, regardless of symbolic timing. This strengthens your internal reference point even further. Instead of associating the date with emotional elevation, your system associates it with normalcy. The absence of emotional spikes becomes familiar. It becomes predictable. As a result, events like birthdays lose their psychological novelty. Not because they lack objective value, but because your brain has learned not to depend on them for emotional grounding. Your stability comes from continuity, not interruption. This is why you may feel calm, neutral, or focused on your birthday, rather than emotionally elevated. Your system is optimized for long-term equilibrium, not short-term spikes. And this adaptation was not a mistake. In fact, traits like this existed long before modern celebrations. Because throughout human history, individuals like you served a very specific psychological function. Now, if strong emotional reactions to symbolic events were necessary for survival, every human being would share them equally. But they do not. From an evolutionary perspective, diversity in emotional response patterns was essential. Early human groups depended on individuals who remained psychologically stable, regardless of external fluctuations. These individuals were less influenced by temporary highs or lows. Their decisions were guided by continuity, not emotional spikes. While others reacted strongly to social approval or ceremonial moments, these individuals maintained focus on long-term outcomes. They were less distracted by symbolic recognition and more anchored in environmental reality. This created a powerful survival advantage, because survival rarely depended on how someone felt on a specific day. It depended on who remained steady across all days. These individuals became stabilizers within their groups. Their nervous systems were not designed to rise and fall with every social signal. They were designed to preserve clarity under changing conditions. And that same nervous system still exists today. But modern society places enormous emphasis on symbolic validation. It teaches people that meaning must be marked, announced, and celebrated, which creates a quiet conflict for individuals whose brains were designed for something else entirely. Modern culture is built around amplification. Dates are highlighted. Notifications are automated. Attention is concentrated and delivered in bursts. Birthdays have become psychological events, reinforced by social platforms, reminders, and collective expectation. The system is designed to create emotional spikes, but your nervous system was not designed to depend on spikes. It was designed to maintain internal equilibrium. Psychologists describe two primary reward orientations: external reward orientation and internal reward orientation. External systems depend on recognition, praise, and symbolic markers to generate emotional reinforcement. Internal systems generate reinforcement through progress, autonomy, and internal alignment. Your system operates primarily on internal reward architecture. This means your brain releases satisfaction when you move forward, solve problems, and maintain direction, not when the calendar tells you that you are supposed to feel different. So when your birthday arrives, your nervous system does not register it as a meaningful shift, because nothing fundamental has changed internally. And this reveals the most important truth of all. Because when someone stops depending on symbolic reinforcement, their sense of self begins to operate on an entirely different foundation. And when your identity is built on internal continuity, it becomes resistant to external fluctuation. You do not rise dramatically when attention increases, and you do not collapse when it disappears. Your sense of self remains intact, independent of temporary reinforcement. This creates a form of psychological stability that many people spend years trying to develop. Because when validation comes from within, it cannot be taken away by silence. Treating your birthday like a normal day does not mean you lack emotional depth. It often means your emotional foundation exists beyond symbolic checkpoints. Your brain does not require ritual to confirm your existence. It already knows who you are. This allows you to move through time without needing constant reminders that you matter. But it can also make you appear invisible to others. Because in a world where identity is often performed, Individuals with internally anchored identity tend to withdraw from unnecessary exposure. They observe more than they announce. They continue forward quietly. Your brain was never designed to depend on symbolic checkpoints to maintain stability. It maintains continuity on its own. This is why the date does not transform how you see yourself. Because your identity was never built from moments. It was built from movement.